Hello friends, welcome again. So in today's tutorial we're going to see about Docker volume. So Docker volume is an important topic in Docker because whenever we talk about the persistent data, right? So Docker volume plays an important role in it. So let me give you a situation or a basic context. What is a Docker volume? So Docker volume you can simply relate just like in cloud vendors we have EFS and NFS, right? So whenever we are using any centralized storage system, so that we can keep the data in a persistent way. So let's take an example. So as we know that the Docker generally spin up a container of our specific service. In this example we have one container and this is the another container. As we know that whenever the container are running and whatever the data they are writing into, right, it keeps into their container only, right? So whenever, let's say, if we accidentally removed any container, so whatever the data it had, it would be lost. We cannot recover that, right? So we just have to recreate the container again, and then we would have to do the same process. But in general way or in general practice, this is not the best possible solution, right? So whenever we are working in an industry standard, so we want our data to be persistent. Let's say we have an application, this is a front-end application and this is a back-end application, and the front-end application is writing some data into back-end, and we want that this particular data which is being handled by container 2 should be persistent, right? So no matter if the container still alive or dies, we should have at least the data, because whenever we talk about the microservices or if we talk about Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, so this is a very frequent practice. You would see that the containers are keep on spinning up and dying. So in this case we generally use maybe if you are running on a cloud vendor services, then you can opt out for EFS services as well. But if you just want to use the Docker native, then Docker provides us a solution for Docker volume. So Docker volume is just like a centralized storage system for containers. So you can simply understand that whatever the data container 1 and container 2 are right now doing or writing, it is just it would be they would be pushing it to centralized this particular server, right, where we just have mapped all of the services. The Docker volume we just have mapped to our containers. So normally if we talk about the Docker volumes, then we have Docker volumes of three types. First is normal volume, and second is bind volume, third is anonymous volume. Hold on, I think it has removed, so let me put in here. This is just directory of home or any user where we just want to map it, and this could be localhost or either it could be on cloud, right? So Docker volumes are generally of three types: normal volume, bind volume, and one more are anonymous volume. So we will go through one by one. So first, Docker volume or the normal volumes are normal volumes are simply volumes that are created by Docker, right? I mean, you can create them, but the volumes would be stored in Docker's native directory, right? So like all other applications, Docker does have its native directories where it is stored the default configuration. So no problem, we will go through the examples and we will see how it is creating the Docker volumes at the default location, right? So Docker generally provides us a simple command which is docker volume create, and then you can give the name of the volume, and then this particular test will be created at the default place of the Docker volume, right? And then we can map it, and then we can map it with the container, and then whatever the data container would be writing in that particular directory would be reflected back to our this test directory, which is locally mapped with our hard drive, right, or any cloud vendor specifically. So this is a normal volume, and then we have bind volume. So bind volume is something that we specifically want to bind any directory. Means we do not want to go ahead with the Docker's default volume location, and we have some other locations which could be on cloud, which could be on any network storage, or which could be any physical hard drive or any specific directory. We can bind that particular directory to that container, and then we can get all the data of the containers in a persistent way into that specific directory. And third are the anonymous volumes. Anonymous volumes, or you can say dangling volumes, are the volumes that are not known to the Docker, but they somehow got created. Maybe when we had multiple containers running and we previously have created some of the Docker volumes, or sometime it also happens that whenever we pull up some images and then we spin up some testing containers, then Docker itself creates some volumes in the backend to keep their data into it. But when we manually delete those Docker containers, so somehow those volumes which were previously attached to those containers remain same into the Docker's default location. That is why Docker does not have any idea, or so anonymous volumes are the simple volumes which Docker does not have any information about, right? And which are not mapped to any other running containers. So in Docker's term, we call it anonymous volume. So we will see all of them one by one, right? So let's head over to the terminal and see the normal volumes. So here I'm in the same directory, and right now we just have a Docker file, so we can ignore it. So what I'm doing is I'm just simply creating Docker volume create, and then the test and the name of the volume, which is test volume. I just created it. And if I see Docker and Docker volume ls, you can see that this particular volume has been created, right? Test volume, we can see. Ignore about this my volume that was previously being used by me. So hold on a second. And this test volume that we just have created, and we will talk about these more volumes, right? So if you just wanted to see where this particular test volume has been created, so if we check that, we can inspect this test volume as well. So if you do Docker and then inspect and then volume and then the test, Docker volume inspect and then test volume, and here you can see, right? So this is the detail of the volume that we just have created, and the mount point is the default path of Docker volume location, right? So by default, Docker generally store their volumes at this particular location. If you want to see it, I just have to give the sudo privileges because Docker is being installed using root directory. And okay. So I'm right now inside this root directory, and if I go to where the Docker has been installed, warlib docker and then volumes, this is the path by default. And here you can see the test volume has been created, right? If we go inside the test volume and go to my data, here whatever the things that we will map with this particular volume to the container, it would be reflecting all of the data here, right? So we will see that. I'm exiting out from here, and let's go and then attach this volume to some container. So let's say right now I do not have any container, I just have Docker volume and then this particular test volume. This is a normal volume, right? And I'm going to attach it to, or I'm going to mount this volume to the container. So what I will do is I will just use Docker and run, then -ti is for interactive terminal. I'm directly giving the terminal access. I'm going to get the terminal access, and then I'm going to use -v as a volume, and then I'm only going to provide the test volume. This is the name that the normal volume that we have created. And this particular volume is going to be mapped with the root directory, let's say, of the container, whatever the container we're going to spin up now. And after that we're going to provide the image name and what is the terminal that you want to take. And so I'm just taking a bash of the terminal. Ubuntu is the image. I'm attaching my test volume to the root directory of this particular container. So let's run it. So I directly reach to this particular containers bash terminal, and if I go to its root directory, right now I'm in the root directory, and let's say whatever the content this particular container is writing, so say file 1 and file 2 and file 3. Now we have all these 3 files at root directory. Now these files are persistent and would be copied over to the test volume that we have created, right, at that particular location. So let me go to that location directly. So if I go to cd var lib docker and then the volumes, and then the test volume, and then underscore data. Okay, let's go till there only. And here we have underscore data, and if we see, we have all the three files copied over, right? So instantly it will work instantly. So whatever the things, let's say this is a production server, and this is writing some this is gathering some of the important data of the customers, and I just have mounted this particular root directory. But if it is writing into any specific directory, then you can map that particular directory as well with the test volume. But let's say if it is creating some of the files, let's say hello from hello world, right? And we just going to save it to a file, and it is writing some kind of any kind of random data, and it would be instantly copied over to our location where we have just mapped it, right? So if you see here, the file is already there, a file is already being copied. So if I just get it out, we have hello world. And the same thing would happen, let's say if it is removing, if we are removing everything from here, and it would be removed from the mapped location as well. So if you do ls, it is removed, right? So this is a simple concept of Docker volume, and this is a normal volume. Why we are calling it normal? Because it is just storing the volume to this Docker's internal internal path where it generally store all of the volume data. So I'm just exiting out from here, and as soon as I will exit out from here, so let me show you what will happen if we exit out from the container. So let's say the same thing we are doing, and it has just created a file under this particular container, and we have seen that this is coming to that particular file. So let's see again, and if I do, so here we have this file, and what will happen, let's say next time you are running in a just Kubernetes cluster, and this particular container dies. Right now I do not have that container running, but you already have this data, right? The data is persistent, so whatever the data that container was writing, you still have the access to it, right? So this is the use case of Docker container, Docker volumes. So let's take another example of bind volume. Though another type of volume that we have seen is the bind volume, right? So where we specifically bind out any specific directory to our container instead of using the Docker's default volume location. So let's take an example of that. So I'm just creating here, let's say I just have created, we're going to use the same directory, right? So we see this is the path of my directory. And if I'm running the same command, docker run, right? So let's say, so instead of test volume, I have to just give the complete path, right? Whatever the path you want to bind with your containers, any specific directory, you just have to give the path. This is the only difference between bind and the normal. So normal would, in the normal volume, you just have to give the name, and then the path would be taken care by the Docker, right? Because Docker would be writing out that to its default volume path. And in the bind, you just have to specify the complete path where you want to create the Docker volume, and then you going to map it with the containers, any specific directory. So here I'm going to use this Docker's tutorial directory as a Docker volume, and we're going to map it with the containers any root directory. So whatever the things the containers root will have will be copied over to Docker's tutorial. It's the same way like a normal volume, right? So we just have created, and I'm inside the container, and if I go to its home directory and create anything, file 1 and then file 2, it would be coming over to this particular Docker's tutorial, right? Here we can see, ignore about the Docker file, it is an old one, and Docker file 1 and file 2 are there. So this is an example of the bind volume, right? We are just binding this particular directory to root directory of container, and whatever the things would be we would be writing into that container would be copied over to our this local directory. This is a bind volume, right? And the same thing happened here. If I will exit out from this container dies, and we still have that data, right? Here you see we have file 1 and file 2. So this is a second type of volume. And if we see, third is the anonymous volume. Anonymous volume is simply means the volumes that are left behind in the Docker, and somehow they did not get deleted, or they got created using any kind of containers, and now they are not mapped with any containers, so those are called anonymous or dangling volumes, right? So in Docker tutorial or in Docker documentations, there is a specific command to find out the anonymous or the dangling volumes, which is docker and volume and then ls and then -f equals to dangling and equals to true and then -q. So this command, what this command will do is this command will list the dangling volumes or the volumes which are not attached anywhere or which are just kind of anonymous, right? Because I recently have deleted it before starting this tutorial. So otherwise it would have listed the dangling volumes or the volumes which are rogue, right? Which are not mapped with anywhere. So it would list all of the volumes here. And apart from that, if you just wanted to give more commands, right? So there is you can give DockerVolume and then -help, and it will list you the commands what you can do. You can create, inspect, ls and prawn and rm. So you can remove, you can use all of these flags, right, to along. Okay, so it is giving us error that volume is in use. So why it is giving error is, okay, it is giving error because this particular volume is attached with the container that we previously spin up, right? But right now that container is in a stop state, so probably we would have to kill that particular or remove that container from the stop state as well. So if I see this one, this was the one that we just have used 15 minutes back, or this one 25 one. So I'm just deleting this container, and let's delete this one as well, and now try to remove this volume. Okay, it is still saying that it is in a use. Okay, my volume, it was not the one that we just used. Test volume was the one. Okay, so my volume, forget about it because I was previously using this volume, and that is why we were not able to delete it. So if you want, then we can delete it, this one as well. I just have to remove the containers for this one as well. So I think this is the one that I was just using. Okay, let's remove this one as well. Okay, now I think I would be able to remove that my volume as well. Okay, it is still saying, so it means this is the last one. Okay, now we have removed it, right? So DockerVolume ls, and if we see, these are the only two now. So if we see, if we check about these two volumes, what are these two volumes? So you can do just DockerVolume inspect and then give the ID of the volume, and you can see that this is an anonymous volume, and this one is this is the mount point of this particular volume, right? So I know actually why this is coming up. I cannot delete it right now because this is being used by one of my Minikube Kubernetes cluster, so that is why I'm just keeping all of them here. All right, so okay, so these are the three things that we were discussing about the DockerVolume. So normal volume is a simple volume where we can mount the directory, and we can simply give the mount point or the volume name, and then the Docker would be taking care of the path of the DockerVolume. And then the bind volume is a specific directory or the cloud directory where we just simply want to bind that to our containers root directory. And then the anonymous volumes are the volumes that Docker does not have information about, right? So these are this is the simple tutorial about DockerVolume. I hope that it might have got cleared your concept about DockerVolume. I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you.